Hey, it's Chris. It's no motherfucking snakes in a plane, but it's bees in space. Apiary, Stonemaier sent me a copy. Let's talk. Is it really the best Stonemaier game that they put out? Well, let's debate. Let me run it over for you. Let's go. So bees in space, right? Like, what the deuce is going on, Chris? I have no idea. But that was the theme they went with, and this is what we've got in front of us. We have a huge, massive, sprawling board here. The thing I'll say about this and Expeditions, they're probably both about a third bigger than they really could be otherwise, and they take up a lot of table space. So with both of these, there is a tiny bit of setup, but there's also just a table hog in general, because not only do you have this sectioned off board in one of essentially the 7 different sections you're going to be placing your workers or mitigating ways of playing the game, but you're also going to have a huge board right here in front of you as well that is not small in the first place, that you can actually add hexes to along the way as you go. And so then this board becomes a lot bigger and a lot more of things going on. What are those things going on though? How does this game play? What do you need to know? Now this game is essentially a point buffet, if you will. I don't know why everyone uses point salad, point buffet, because you're picking and choosing which way you want to score your points based on your grid, based on the main action areas that you're going to be throwing down your little spinnable worker bees in order to get the actions as you go. Now, the twist on this game is literally, well, a twist. You take your worker here and you twist them, and they get stronger from 1 to 4. And then when they go 4, you're gone, and you potentially maybe start over back at 1. And it does the whole worker placement, worker retrieve, worker placement, worker retrieve, gather income. And you rinse and repeat until you fill up the hibernation comb here at the bottom of the board. Because each time one of your workers hits 4 and then has to be upgraded 1 further, it hibernates. You lose it. It's placed off of the board. You have to be able to re-recruit it back over here at the grow phase. And you get to place one of these little markers that you have here that are faction correspondingly to the hibernation comb, which again gets you various ways of points, scoring, mitigation, resources, but it also what is an end game trigger. Someone places all of these, game ends. Someone fills up the last spot down here, depending on the player count, game ends. And you're scoring points not only during, but majorly speaking, again, afterwards with an end game situation based on the hex-based grid you've built, as well as the hexes along the way that you've utilized. Now, they say 20 different factions to start with, but all that essentially means is that each person starts with one of these 3 hex-based grids, and maybe slightly starts off with a different resource that's highlighted, and it gives you a slight asymmetric rule that you get to start with, as well as maybe a slightly different worker setup. Whenever an opponent moves one of your workers, both players gain queen's favor. Okay, and then at some point you'll be able to upgrade it, which changes just the additional upgrade here alone, and then you get 2 queen's favor. And that's really all the asymmetry that's there. So it's not really a hugely asymmetric game. You're going to have more asymmetry, actually, probably from your map here, as you can see. These are gaining your workers, these are gaining resources, and you're going to have a starting tile, as well as where your faction has to start. Then you're going to have the ability to seed, which we'll talk about later, and then endgame scoring also goes in effect on this board as well. And that's going to go in combination with your docking map, where you're going to be storing your workers in between rounds, either in the active pool, meaning you can still use them, or in the landing area, meaning you've recalled them in some way, shape, or form. You keep your hibernation tokens over here, and then you gather your other little yellow tokens that we'll talk about in a minute right there, because they might come up later. And that is the gist of how you're going to be approaching it on your individual side. Now, I mentioned that these individual player hex boards are going to be different. See, here is the shape is different, and then building costs are lower on those areas. And then you get Queen's faction or favor, as well as victory points in here, and again, a build. And so you're going to be having a different dynamic there. And again, as you go along, you have the ability to get additional hexes, so you can place them potentially, wherever you want along that way. And so it allows you to have some similarities, but also some differences there. More so, I'd argue, than even the factions to begin with, but it's going to change your strategy, the combination thereof of both. So that's kind of where the strength lies. Now, with any point buffet, you not only have to have multiple ways of scoring points and multiple actions, but you also have to have tons of different resources. Now, this game actually surprisingly only has about 5 different resources you're going to be utilizing, which is a lot less than I expected going into it. Let's run you through basically what we've got going on the board here. I'll run briefly through each of these areas, why they're important, and then how they interact, but also the fact that this board that you're seeing is the 4 and 5 player board. The 1 to 3 player board is on the other side and has slightly less worker placements, slightly less spots over here and over here and over here. But otherwise, the actions themselves are incredibly similar or practically the same in a nutshell. So the game is very simple, very straightforward, right? Place your workers, recall your workers. That's it. The difference and the strategy comes from these different areas that you're going to be throwing down. 6 plus the hibernation. So let's run these through very briefly. Explore, advance, grow, carve, convert, research. Very straightforward. Over here, you place your worker. It's the sum total. And I really like this mechanism of the sum total of the workers, meaning sometimes it matters if you're the first one, sometimes it really doesn't. So you take the sum total and you get to move this little B however many spaces you want. And the clever part about this is if it's an unexplored area, you get to take the bonus token that's there and then flip up one of these planet tokens. And these planet tokens are maybe going to have a resource available in the first place. These planet tokens maybe already have a resource up, but then they also have a blank space, meaning if you're the person that picks this one up, you get to decide what goes there, and you place one of those resources in whatever space you want there. So now the next person that lands on this is going to get 2 of the green. And this one is a special one in the sense that if you place a 4 worker in this area, you're going to get 2 more resources and 3 victory points. So that one's really good. Most of the other ones, though, have a 1, 2, or just 3 resources in general. So you're just moving your little bee around wherever you want and gradually getting these bonuses and, utilizing it that. And in one of the main ways to actually get resources in the first place, you can manipulate however you want. And you can see up here, this one's actually a 3 spot. And so I put 3 water, just out of camera shot there, 3 water in that one right there. So that's a blot of one of your 3 main resources of the pollen, the little greenery, and the water in the first place. And so that is explore. Advance over here, again, you're utilizing the same combination system, meaning you take the sum of the workers and that gives you access to these columns. So if this worker here, if you can't see, this is a 3, and then the blue worker, which would have been originally in this spot until the green worker came, this blue worker is a value of 3 as well. So now there's a total value of 6. So I could access not only this column of 2 plus, 3 plus, or 5 plus. And so I could buy anything over here. Buying is at the bottom of these tokens. The action is at the top. The victory points are on the left. And they just tell you a little bit of how you're going to be doing them because you have basically the income tiles, the mitigation action tiles as you go along that are going to give you abilities, power-ups, or other effects, and then the instant rewards or the instant get something really good. But obviously the instants are going to give you potentially also less victory points, so you have to balance that out because if you also have income coming in when you recall of your workers, well, your engine is going to slow down much compared to your opponents. We'll blow this up for you right now. You can see income phase is those little arrows. You get water. You can place a water and store water there because you can only have so many storage spots on your little hex space grid to begin with. It tells you how many victory points at the end of the game, and this is the cost down here. And I like the fact that the blues and the reds here are all unique. Grow. When you get this, gain one worker for free. It costs you 1 pollen. You get 2 victory points at the end. And then the last one here, render wax. Gain 1 of these little sheet tokens, and for each of these icons you have up, it gets you or costs you 1 of those in the first place, 2 victory points at the end, and it's an instant action. And so all of those are going to be different, unique in how you build your hive, your colony, your apiary to begin with. Now, before I talk about convert here, I didn't talk about the fact that any of these 6 areas, if you place a 4 strength worker, you get also something additional. So as your workers power up, they're going to get you more when you place them, not only more access, more actions individually, but just better ones as well. Over here, if you do that, you get the 4 strength benefit on the tile that I mentioned. Over here, you get 3 victory points. Convert allows you to teach a dance. That's these dance cards down here, which allow you to basically get special formulas for creating your own conversions, because this is converting resources to resources. Discard a card, gain a card, get any resource rid of, gain any resource, make 2 into this, make 3 into that, and you can specialize your own ones based on the ones that are out there and create a dance. And then anytime somebody else uses your combination, you get Queen's Favor. We'll talk about Queen's Favor in the end because that's another end game scoring victory point track sliding bonus. Then we go over to Carve here. You can only play a 4 into Carve. That gets you these special end game scoring victory points, which are many more victory points than any other individual area as a whole. And these do not refill, unlike the advance area. Then we have Grow. Grow is how you get your workers back. You get the ability to get them back in any combination. Stronger you put in, stronger you can get out, because you don't have to start them off at 1 necessarily. You can start them off at a higher value, but it's going to cost you more, but then you're also going to lose them sooner. So how quickly do you want to cycle the end game? Because as I mentioned, down here at the bottom again, the hibernation happens as you fill this up, and the quicker you fill this up, the closer the end game gets. Last but not least here is the research in the lower left-hand corner. You just get cards. The higher the value, the more cards you draw. You still only keep 1, but now this is the other side of things. These cards are going to be make it or break it. And what I mean by that is this says, okay, gain any resource. That's great. You get 1 any resource anytime you want during your turn. But this planting is very important, because at the bottom of that worker hex-based board I showed you earlier, you have 2 slots, potentially up to 4 if you unlock extra hexes. You put this, slide it under your board, and it gets you now 4 victory points per each set of 4 tiles that I have. And that is a lot of victory points. And so that becomes very important as well, being able to slot these. Now, the tricky part is, and the blessing curse of this is, some of these cards are great and some of these cards are kind of meh, which is good in the fact that it gives you the convert ability on the board that we mentioned previously, because you're just going to get cards that you don't want. And that's okay. But at the same time, you know, with this thick a deck, they're not all unique, and you're going to end up with some duplicates. You're going to end up with some ones that just don't fit your strategy, and you're going to end up with ones, especially given your strategy, that are going to seed easier or plant better than other ones at times. And that's going to be the luck mitigation in this game that you can't necessarily deal with. The tiles in the upper corner of the advance, yeah, you can cycle through those. There's actually a hibernation comb down here at the bottom that actually allows you to swap that whole row out and get new, because as you basically get them and take them off, then you slide them all over, and then you put a new one out into that column and rinse and repeat. Something I didn't mention, you have the ability to unlock these additional hexes. These hexes, along with your main board hexes, also, the more you fill, if you completely do it, you get 8 victory points that way, which again is probably second only to the research and the carve. So again, you've got multiple ways of getting big points, and then you're nitpicking down here from the tiles as well as from the Queen's Favor. Now, the Queen's Favor is something else a little bit different as a whole. The Queen's Favor is, well, just this track down here at the bottom. And the weird thing is, it's actually just one of those where wherever you end up, you get that amount of victory points at the end, not during the game. Don't make that mistake, because you're just trying to get up higher and higher and higher as you score for the end game scoring, not for the turn by turn basis. So blessing curse there, depending on how you want to do that, as another appetizer on the buffet. So that's the game in a nutshell, right? You're just gradually placing these workers down. Anytime they get ready back to return to you, they go up by 1. So your 1s become 2s, 2s become 3s, 3s become 4s, 4s become hibernated. You lose them, but you can also significantly bump other people's out. You can even bump your own out. So if I put my own in advance here, 3 here, bumps there. Well, this 3 now have the option of either making it a 4 and putting it in my active pool if I want to reuse it as the blue player, or I can put it in my landing area and not bump it up yet, because I don't want to lose it, or I don't want to have it hibernate, or I don't want to have it upgraded yet. And so that dynamic of having to change and bump your workers back and forth is clever. It works really well. It's unique. I like it. Is it as good as other games that do it necessarily in a different way, especially with the, you know, drawing them back in, picking them up, and getting your income? Well, that's where your mileage is going to vary. Pros and cons here. We'll go straight into it. And, you know, Dwellings of Elderville and things like that maybe do a little bit better. This is a classic mid-weight Euro with lots of different options. And so the flavor of this is really going to be whether or not it's a make it or break it for you as a whole. I don't think it's actually terribly hard to learn. As much as I do not like the way Stonemeier's rule books are often set up, they often are just completely out of order in terms of how I would teach it or how I try and learn the games. Once you get the flow of this game, it really is a lot smoother than I expected. It's better than Expeditions also from that aspect of things. And so it just really depends. The one thing I'll say common between this and Expeditions, though, is that I don't really want to play either of them at a 4 or 5 player count. You know, I'm looking at this game and going, this is an optimal game from 60 to 75 minutes. And anything more than 3 is going to be higher than that. And so just like my biggest criticism of Expeditions, which actually ironically will actually be out after this review at this point, but it's that they both can overstay their welcome at the higher player counts, and it just seems to drag a little bit, although this one suffers less as a whole. So I think really optimistically, this is a 3-player game sweet spot for me. I'm not going to say 4 is bad. There's going to be a lot more bumping in 4, which ultimately actually may speed things up if people don't get hung over by the AP. But it's doing stuff in just a slightly different manner, a slightly different twist, and I like tile laying hex-based games. And so the combination on your big sheet here of strategy optimizing with the faction, I mean, it's probably not as much asymmetry as I would want personally. Again, I wish the factions themselves were more than just these, stacks of 3 tiles with 1 ability, right? Doesn't really do as much for me as I would like. And the combination of these two is nice, but we see better in the sense of even something like Planet Unknown with the asymmetry and the tile laying in that sense. And so I wish it has a little bit more as a whole. I like the fact that the blues and the red tiles, the developments and the recruitments here are asymmetric and all unique. I hate it when you have duplicates in there and then you get a sort of a stale meta, or this thing gets stale as a whole. And so I like the fact that that is constantly evolving and you're having to balance between your income as well as the others in terms of endgame scoring and mitigation along the way. I think that is rather smooth as well. The moving around and getting resources, I like the ability to customize my resource areas, and to have such a plethora of areas to do it is really, really nice. Carving is make it or break it. You're basically doing your exchange, right? 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to tile in this game. Not a whole lot different than some of your other Euro games. You have a whole separate area that allows you to do a little bit easier, a little stronger, and even to customize it. So again, it's got a few tweaks in it that make it unique. I'm not going to say make it stand out to make it like super, super excellent, because I didn't leave this game going, wow, but I left this game also going, this is probably the best Stonemaier game I've played, top to bottom. I like Expeditions a lot, but Expeditions has a few of those same faults in the non-modularity setup, the too big randomness of the cards, some ambiguity with some of the errata and the cards themselves of trying to figure them out, and it just left me a little bit wanting. And so this one just plays smoother even at the lower player counts. And I'd argue that at the lower player counts, it's going to be much faster as well. Not that that's a huge deal, but I hate games that seem to overstay their welcome. And that seems to be a common theme for my issues with this and the other previous ones, Scythe, Expeditions, this one, Tapestry. They all have that tendency just a little bit at the higher player counts. And so if you can mitigate that or have it happen any easier, yeah, it's going to be good. And there's a little bit less AP overall as well with the workers. I mean, the workers only go up to 4. You only have 2 options, play 1, recall 1. And you're going to be bumping other people's. That's the other thing that people may not like. Now, it's sort of a positive interaction because it's going to help you if someone lays a higher worker down into one of these areas, so that when you bump another one out of there and you bump one of these, now you might be able to get access to an area over here on the columns you may not have been able to do before if it was just your worker there alone. And if it is just your worker there alone, well, you still get a +1. And so that's okay. The other downside, I'd say, again, is this research deck over here. There are just seemingly cards over here in the research deck as a whole that just don't seem as applicable, or that are slightly harder for the seeding that you're placing for the endgame scoring under your board. And then this endgame is only 2 victory points per honeypot. Honeypots are the hardest things to get as a whole. Well, when you get 1 like that, as opposed to 2 per active worker, like that's just not equivocal in my mind. Now, I like the fact that there's more of these, but that means also that you're just maybe going to get ones that you can't utilize nearly as well. And so it's good that you're discarding them and using them very quickly, but they may not be as connected as the rest of these sections as you may like. And I like the fact that you can lose workers and get workers depending on if you have too many hibernating. But if you have more hibernating, it's going to get you down here in the hibernation comb a lot faster. It's going to trigger the end game scoring. So maybe you don't want to let people's engines build. Maybe you want to rush towards the end of the game and see what happens. And I like that aspect of an end game condition a lot more because it's a forced mechanic. This game is not going to drag in the other way where you can just sort of let it go and not force it. And this is automatically going to force it at some point, shape, or form. And I know that sounds contradictory, that it sometimes goes a little bit too long, but I mean, yeah, if you have 4 players with 3 to 4 workers and you've got some AP in there, well, this is going to sort of set the clock a little bit more than anything else, which is, again, nice in that way. I didn't think there were too many resources. That was my big problem with one of my other good reviews that I'll be talking about shortly as well, Maple Valley. Like Maple Valley has like 10 different resources. And so I didn't feel like there were ever like out of control resource management with this game. But again, the two advanced resources over here, the honey and the little brown square, which I'm completely blanking out at this time, sometimes you just get a couple of those that you just can't utilize because there's active resource management. It actually behooves you sometimes to lose resources to gain queen's favor to get endgame scoring. And so that's the one thing I like of the resource side of things. That's a clever mechanism of if you just get too many resources, you can actually use it to a benefit. Sort of reminds me of Champions of Midgard. When your workers died, the expansion made it so that when your workers died, you just weren't SOL, you actually got a benefit going to Valhalla and you were rewarded. And that's the same thing here, is if you just get more resources, you're going to go up in the queen's favor. And you can kind of see how it's spaced out here at the bottom. But as you get to the top, the victory points really start going up as well. And so that's very useful as a whole if that becomes your way of building your engine or scoring as a whole, because that's the other thing I'll say in this game is that it gives you a plethora of options. You're not pigeonholed into one or the other. You are able to advance in many different ways. If you want more conversion, if you want more carving, if you want more explorer advance, how you want your income versus your recruitment and development ratios to look, you can do that and it gives you some wiggle room there. So I like that. This game is a little bit of a race as a whole, but at the higher player counts, because of the worker dynamics, because of the shifting of the tiles, you can plan, but you may also not get what's out there by the time your turn comes around. In the early rounds, you're not going to have a clue necessarily, as I mentioned, of all those avenues of how you want to pursue, even with the knowledge of your faction and your board, what's going to be the best avenue. And so you're going to have to be more tactically oriented rather than pure strategy, because this game is going to leave you frustrated if that's more of your interest. And I guess at the late game, sometimes the actions don't feel as consequential. You're trying to just basically get as many resources or as many tiles filled onto your board, and it's less about making the most optimal move, and it's more just about trying to get whatever you can before the square ending you can see sort of looming towards you like the event horizon. And so that's sort of a blessing curse there at the end because your actions are more powerful than they are at the beginning. So final thoughts. This is by far and away the most enjoyable Stonemaier game that I've played yet. I don't say that lightly. I don't say that lightly whatsoever. It's not one of those where every single game is... I know, like, routinely, I have issues with the way that the rule books have been set up. I have issues with just the size, as I mentioned earlier. Everything is about, again, 20% bigger than it could be because it takes up a ton of space on the board, which is fine. It's not a huge issue. But if you have a smaller play area, if you have more constraint, area in the first place as a gamer, that's not an insignificant issue nowadays. I feel like it plays just smoothly. And that is probably one of the biggest compliments I can give a game now, is that I feel like I can slide into the actions. I can slide into starting to see how the combinations between areas are going to be utilized. And I can start to see how I'm going to pick and choose between the tiles over here, the tiles here, the seating of the cards underneath for the victory points, and my resource management over here as I'm moving and manipulating that B around to make things sort of click. So that is something I can't always say. Like when I've played some heavier games earlier this year, even things like Wayfarers, other things along that ilk, I look at and I go, yeah, I understand it up here. I understand it logistically. I understand it mechanically, but it just doesn't feel as cohesive. It feels a little bit disjointed. If one thing out of all of this, it's probably the research cards, just because they can be so hit or miss. And it's probably the biggest factor that you can't mitigate as much as the rest of the board allows. And so that's the one area for me that is a little bit just not as fully useful as a whole, or not as fitting with the other areas and dynamics in the first place. The seeding does, but the fact that you have choices up here, you have choices here, you have choices here, you have choices here, and here it's just draw one, or it's draw a couple, but still, even then, this is a large deck, like I said, and you still may not get the one you want, which is great that you can convert it. But I wish there was almost a tableau here of just 3 up, so you could constantly see or draw. Just again, a small tweak from that aspect to make it more similar to the other areas in that dynamic. The other thing, and this is going to be weird, that queen favor track at the bottom of the board here. I kind of wish there was more reward there. I kind of wish it wasn't just, hey, whatever marker you're past gets you that reward at the end. I kind of wish it was, okay, you hit this marker, you get that victory point. You hit this next marker, you get that more victory points. You get that much more, that much more, that much more. That's about all that I can criticize. It's a really solid game. Mid-weight Euro. A lot of people are going to look at it and go, it's not doing anything unique. But nowadays, unique isn't all that it's cracked up to be either, right? Unique in the sense that it's doing something a lot better than, for me, the other Stonemaier games have done. I have enjoyed this one a lot more. I'll put it that way. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully some food for thought there. Let me know what you think. Comments, questions, concerns down below. There you go. Stay classy. Peace out. Have a great freaking fantastic day. Bees in space. Peace out.